The Parliamentary Committee on Communications has raised serious concerns about the unregulated growth of podcasts, warning of a legal vacuum that could enable harmful content to spread unchecked. This follows public backlash over controversial and derogatory remarks made by MacGyver MacG Mukwevho and his co-hosts on his popular show, podcast and Chill with MacG last week. Parliament's Communications Committee Chairperson Khusela Diko joins us now for more on this conversation. Khusela, thank you so much for your time this evening here on SABC News. Now, there has been a major storm on online social media, particularly when it comes to some of the comments that were made by MacG and his co-hosts on his podcast, certainly raising the alarm when it comes to the regulation of online media and podcasts.
Yeah, good evening, Bali. Thank you so much for having me on your program, and good evening to your viewers as well. Indeed, there's been a lot of backlash on the comments that were made by MacG. But I think for ourselves as a portfolio committee, the issue is not so much about MacG, but what it does is to put a razor-sharp focus on the issue of podcasts. Now, these are discussions that we have been having in the portfolio committee, and as I say, they just come into attention now because of the current furor around MacG. Let me tell you why this issue is important, Bali. In South Africa, you have over 3.2 million people who engage with podcasts on a weekly basis. Now, that is the size of our biggest radio stations. I saw a report from PwC not so long ago, which estimated this number could rise to as much as 19 million. So you are talking about platforms that have a huge reach. And because they have a huge reach, they also have a lot of influence. Now, they operate in what we have said is a regulatory gray area. The legislation that we currently have, it's outdated. The broadcasting industry is governed by the Broadcasting Act of 1999. The broader sector, ICT sector, is governed by the Electronic Communications Act of 2005. And I'm sure you'll appreciate that when these laws were created, you did not have online media of the size that we do today. You did not have media that operates across borders. And therefore, it's important that our legislation is updated to be able to respond to the current challenges. And what we've been raising with the Minister of Communications in particular is that where you need to start is to accelerate the completion of the audiovisual policy, because then that will begin to bring these over-the-top services, the podcasts in particular, under the regulation and the governance of, amongst others, the Broadcasting Act, and therefore begin to create a code of ethics for them to be able to operate.
And Khusela, how far are we in terms of looking into those regulations? Because I understand that process is underway in Parliament.
When you say how far, Bali, I can tell you that your guess is as good as mine. When we came into Parliament last year, these were things that were supposed to be top of mind. There were urgent issues that the department was supposed to deal with. The industry, in successive engagements that we've had with them, they've raised the delays around the SABC bill. They've raised the delays around this audio and audiovisual policy. And it's really important that attention is given to them, because if you fail to do so, you see, now we are talking about one particular case. And I want to make the point that when we speak about regulation of podcasts, it's not about shutting down creativity. It's not about gagging people or taking away the right to freedom of expression. What it is to be able to protect them as well as people who are hurt by maybe harmful content that is expressed on their podcast. We're dealing with issues of misinformation. You're dealing with unjustified shaming. You're dealing with content that is harmful to kids. You look at some of these podcasts and they don't even have classification as far as the Film and Publication Board goes. So what could be adult content, and this was raised very sharply in the Portfolio Committee, adult content is proliferated across Twitter, across YouTube. So our focus is really around the over-the-top services, as they're called, as a whole, and then zooming into podcasts. Currently in South Africa, media is only characterized as either radio, print, or television. So that gives you a sense of how urgent it is that we are able to get the department to move with the necessary speed on these issues.
And Khusela, looking at these regulations, it also does hinge when it comes to, freedom of speech in the country. How do you plan to maneuver that when it comes to, like you say, not gagging certain people in the country?
You see, one of the most beautiful things about South Africa is our constitution. Now, that constitution in section 16 guarantees the freedom of expression, which it then limits, I think also in section 15, to say that no right has no obligations or responsibilities to the other. But the same constitution speaks about the rights to dignity, it speaks about rights to equality, it speaks about the right to privacy. And obviously, from time to time, there will be tensions between these two rights. We have a responsibility as Parliament, as South Africans in general, as the judiciary, to protect these constitutionally enshrined rights. And that is why regulation is important, because what it does is to begin to create a platform for coexistence, to be able to resolve these tensions. And when we say regulations, people immediately assume that we are talking about things like censorship. You know, we come from a history where we know what it feels like to be censored. We know what it feels like for people not being able to raise their voices, to share their views and their ideas, and we would never do that. And that is the reason why, for example, the print industry, the broadcasting industry, they have voluntarily gone out to develop codes of practice in line with what the Independent Communications Authority of South Africa guides them. Those code of practice, they voluntarily, what we call self-regulation, sign up to those codes because they understand that regulation works in the interests of everybody. And there are many positives to that. I don't think that we need to get into now. But so we're talking about self-regulation, co-regulation, where there's an agreement in terms of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable on those platforms, and indeed then also looking at issues of classification in line with the Film and Publications Board.
All right, Khusela, thank you so much for your time. That's Khusela Diko, Chairperson of Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Communications, just giving us an update there when it comes to those regulations, particularly looking at social media and platforms like podcasts and the regulation there needed.